Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, your weekly exploration of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. And yes, we are exploring the pre-crisis DC Comics multiverse in a grand style. Today we're doing a story from issue 15 of Shazam, published on the 20th of August 1974. Peter's going to tell you about the cover.
We're in the 100-page era, folks. At the top, DC 100 pages for only 60 cents. And you know what that means? There's an awful lot of reprint material in this. There are actually only 2 original stories, one of which we're covering, but I'll tell you about all the others first. The reprint stories include Mr. Tawny's Bouncing Shoes, featuring Talkie Tawny, the talking tiger who turns inventor, and this is represented by a panel of Tawny bouncing, basically, with one giant leap over city skyscrapers.
Yes, I want some bouncing shoes, please.
I've got some bouncing shoes. You ever seen the way I walk? Yes.
Yeah, well, is that why your knees are always failing on you, because you're bouncing shoes? Maybe you should just wear normal shoes.
Pretty much, yes. Too much bouncing in my youth, that's the problem.
I heard that rumour.
I know, I started it. The other reprint stories in this include The World's Mightiest Girl meets The Chameleon Girl, a Mary Marvel story. The World's Maddest Scientist creates Savannah's Good Inventions. And we've got a nice headshot of Dr. Thanius Bodog Sylvana there, who's looking incredibly grumpy. The World's Mightiest Family fights the King of All Time. And we see a picture of this King of All Time. A nice headshot of him. He has got a strange purple pointed helmet with 2 antennae coming out of him. He kind of looks like It looks like Bob Hoskins, actually, to be honest.
Does he?
I think he does.
Right, okay. Yes, I can see that, yes.
If you shove a purple helmet and Bob Hoskins.
Obviously later in his career, not quite at his Long Good Friday peak. Definitely post Super Mario Brothers. Anyway.
And we've got plus the Incredible Calculator and The Day Civilization Went Backwards. All lovely reprint classics. There is another new story in this. The World's Mightiest Boy battles the Man in the Paper Armour. A new shocker. And in this, Captain Marvel Jr. is flying down to possibly attack a ginger-haired man who's wearing a suit made out of newspaper. Gasp, but Captain Marvel Jr. is bouncing, recoiling back from this paper-armoured suit. Incredible.
The man in the paper suit, if you imagine, listeners, Eric Idle in a ginger wig.
Yes, very much so. Attitude and everything, yes.
I don't think he's too busy these days. Maybe if we decide to do that story, we can get Eric to do his voice.
Well, we're not doing that story today. No, we're not doing any of those stories today. We are doing the other new story in this issue. A startling new supervillain team-up. The main image in the cover, we have, on the left-hand side, a picture of Captain Marvel. On the right-hand side, a picture of Superman. And in the middle, in between them, we have prison-fatigued Lex Luthor holding in his hand the Captain Marvel villain, Mr. Mind. Now, if you don't know Mr. Mind, he's a small green worm with some antenna, and because he's an alien, he talks through a wireless-style speaker box that's on a string around his neck, or around his body, really. And Mr. Mind is saying to Luthor,
"You help me defeat my archenemy, Luthor, then I'll help you defeat your super foe."
To which Luthor says,
"You're my kind of man, worm, Mr. Mind."
And Luthor's almost thumbing behind him, pointing at Superman in the background. So yes, exciting.
It's fascinating, this cover. There's one thing I want to point out. At no point on the cover do we see the words Captain Marvel Jr. or Mary Marvel. Everyone's referred to as the World's Mightiest Girl or World's Mightiest Boy, World's Mightiest Mortal.
Fascinating.
It's interesting just sort of noticing this on Shazam, because I think the first few issues they used the phrase the original Captain Marvel. But then obviously letters were exchanged, because there's an issue of, I think, Super DC Giant or DC Special or something where it's got the Shazam family in it. They don't even call them the Shazam family. They call them the World's Mightiest family or the World's, it's interesting how they're not able to use the character names on the cover, but they are inside.
Fascinating.
Very, very interesting. Very indicative of the time. We would refer you, of course, to our earlier episodes featuring the various Captain Marvels for all the discourse on all that sort of stuff. So yes, the main story that we're doing this week is this headline image of quite dumpy and jowly looking Lex Luthor and Mr. Mind. I mean, this is Lex still in his grey prison fatigues era, He hasn't quite become the purple and green armoured, slinky, sexy, body-armoured Lex
Sexy
that he will
Lexi.
become in a few years. Sexy Lexi, of course. So it's quite interesting. I'm doing my best this week, obviously, to try and channel Michael Rosenbaum, obviously. So we'll see how I get on with that. So we leap into the comic. There's an opening page which tells us the contents of the entire issue, and there's lots more besides what Peter told us about in the cover. The 100 pages, especially the Shazam ones, were just absolute gold mines of good reading material. There's text pages, there's stuff about the mythology of the heroes that make up the name Shazam. There's lots of Golden Age reprints. Well worth checking out and tracking down if you ever see them. So, the story properly that we're covering begins on page 4, and the story is introduced by young Billy Batson. And over now to our special guest, Asher Angel.
Holy moly! I've just had one of the weirdest adventures of my life, or Captain Marvel's. Villains like Savannah and Mr. Mind I can accept, but this time I met a bad guy right out of a comic magazine. I've read about the Man of Tomorrow's battles with Lex Luthor, but to actually meet that criminal scientist in person, that was really wild. Here's what happened in Captain Marvel's newest adventure.
Down the side of this opening splash page, we have the word Shazam spelled out, which gives us Solomon, wisdom, Hercules, strength, Atlas, stamina, Zeus, power, Achilles, courage, Mercury, speed, of course. But the main image is of Captain Marvel standing looking strong with his hands on his hips, and Lex Luthor gesturing towards him with a weird device which I've always thought was a kind of fancy-looking, tricky ice lolly.
Yes, it's like a cross between the cosmic rod and a sonic screwdriver.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. It's obviously made of metal. There's a handle, there's a sort of squared off bit further down the handle, and then what looks like a sort of pattern of about 5 or 6 discs with a sort of knob on top at the end. Obviously some kind of electrically powered device or something. But anyway, in this main image, Cap's standing almost in a spotlight. Lex is pointing at him. His little device is glowing, and Lex is saying, "Not even you can resist this weapon, Man of Steel."
We'll see about that, Mr. Luthor.
And then Cap thinks,
I wonder why he keeps calling me that.
and then we get some more text captioning at the bottom, which reads,
From another dimension he comes, a criminal scientist with a scheme to rule the world. Can Captain Marvel stop him? You'll find out in the strangest adventure ever of the world's mightiest mortal. Captain Marvel meets Lex Luthor.
And we're told the adventure is brought to us by...
Story by Denny O'Neill, art by Bob Oxner and Tex Blaisdell, edited by Julius Schwartz.
And running out this panel, there's a little image of Mr. Mind, looking very excited as he says,
I'm in this tale too, and everyone knows my name, Mr. Mind, the worm genius from a distant planet.
A caption at the top of page 2 of the story then reads,
In a secret laboratory called Luthor's Lair.
Yeah, we see Lex looking portly and jowly and overweight in his grey shirt and grey trousers, shouting at a poster of Superman. And Lex is saying, For years you've thwarted me, stymied me, made my life a mess. All my science has been useless against your brute strength. You see Lex is holding the little device that we took great pains to describe in the opening splash panel. And Lex seems to be addressing it in panel 2 as he continues. But now I have the means to destroy you, for I know your weakness, magic. And using scientific methods, I've created a magic accumulator to draw mystic power from the very air. Soon it will have enough hocus pocus to zap. But then Lex is distracted. He sees something on the counter in front of him and he says, Huh? What's this? A magazine. Must have been left by a delivery boy. He picks the magazine up in panel 4 and we see that he's reading an issue, a 100-page issue, no less, of Shazam. You can see an illustration of Captain Marvel on the cover. Lex flicks through it saying, silly stuff. Imagine a kid being able to change into a superhero by merely saying a word. He throws the magazine away in panel 5, saying, idiotic trash. I can think of no better test of my accumulator than to use it to blast that drivel into ash.
However, as Lex Luthor discharges a mystic bolt, the world seems to dissolve around him. And he is falling through an eternity of dazzling void.
It's very interesting because we see Lex zap the comic book with his magic accumulator, and a burst of yellow, green and purple energy emerges all around him, and we see him being flung through it. There's no better way of putting it. He seems to grow and dissolve at the same time, and that rounds out page 2. And the caption for the first panel on page 3, continuing the captioning from page 2, reads,
Until...
and we see Lex standing, still holding the magic accumulator, on what looks like a normal pedestrian street. He whirls around. Looking around him, he says, "Where? How did I get here? Something went amiss. I've been transported from my lab to this street, a street I never saw before." And we see walking up behind Lex, well, it's a kind of humanoid tiger. He's wearing a checked yellow jacket and fantastically patterned green trousers and doffing a large green hat which has a black and yellow band around it. And he spots Lex and he says, "Perhaps I can be of service, mister. I'm Talkie Tawny. You've no doubt heard of me. You are on the corner of 4th and Broadway." Lex looks aghast and says, I can't believe my eyes." Talkie Tawny takes his leave. Walking off, he says, "I understand. My new suit certainly is splendid. Have a nice day." And Lex starts to sweat. He looks very jowly and awful, it must be said. Puts a hand to his head and he thinks, "Great guns! Have I landed in an animated cartoon or something?" And he says out loud in the next panel, "It's not possible. He can't like that suit, and besides, he's a talking tiger. Sure, that's it. I'm dreaming. Having a daymare." The sweat pouring off Lex, he looks above. We can see that he's still holding the magic accumulator, but most significantly, in the background, we can see Billy Batson walking past. Billy obviously notes that Lex is in a state of distress, and he says,
"Something wrong, sir?"
He crosses over to Lex and continues,
"My name is Billy Batson and... Sir, why are you staring at me?"
Lex is leaning down, looking closely at Billy's face, and he says, "You look exactly like someone I just saw in a magazine." And then off camera, at this point, a voice yells,
"Help!"
And the next panel, a man comes rushing up wearing an orange suit and a brown bow tie, like everyone else in the story, quite jowly and heavy about the face, and he's running towards Billy and Lex, and he cries,
"Some kind of metal monster is in a rampage back there."
to which Billy says,
"Holy moly! Sounds like a job for Captain Marvel! Shazam!" As Billy pronounces the ancient wizard's name, a bolt of enchanted lightning rips from the roof of forever.
Yes, with a massive boom, we see the enormous Shazam lightning bolt strike. Boom, of course, is the name of an imminent episode of Doctor Who. So will it have been out on television by the time this episode is released? We'll have to wait and see. We arrive then at top of story, page 4. A caption reads,
And where Billy Batson stood, Captain Marvel stands, but not for long.
Great shot of Cap flying up into the air, and then into panel 2, where we see what looks like, I can best describe it as a sort of giant robot tortoise type thing, but with a longer neck and a sort of dinosaur head. Certainly green and mechanical, and it's chewing on a car. Best way I can put it, we can see that he's already done some damage to a building and to a lamppost, and as Cap flies towards this creature, he's thinking,
Mechanical metal jaws making a meal out of the town.
Cap flies down into the creature's open jaws in the next panel, continuing to think,
This gruesome gadget is apparently remote-controlled. Only 2 villains are capable of such an evil device, and one of them, Dr. Savannah, is in jail.
And at that, with a crunch, the giant green robotic turtle weird dinosaur thing bites down on Cap and its teeth shatter. Fantastic. The final panel of page 4, Cap is free of the creature's mouth with a massive kavomf. He punches it, shattering it into pieces as he thinks.
Which leaves one candidate. But before I check on him, I'll make this thing as harmless as a wad of tinfoil.
He successfully does so, and we arrive at the top of page 5. We can see that Cap is reading a small sign which has been bolted to the side of the creature, a sign which we can read that says, Patented 1974 by Mr. Mind. Well, that's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? Cap says,
Yes, just as I suspected. This is the work of the world's wickedest worm. That patent line is typical of his ego.
In the second panel, page 5, Cap's down examining the wreckage, see if there's any sign of the worm. But after a while, Cap thinks,
As usual, he's nowhere to be found. He's probably miles away.
And then a caption for panel 3 reads,
Not true, for nearby.
Yes, portly old Lex Luthor is watching, still holding his magic accumulator. He's standing some distance away, watching the wreckage. And he's observing everything that's been going on, and he's saying to himself, the kid really changed. Same as in that magazine. I don't like this dream. It's too illogical. We can see at this point that a small green worm with a box hanging around his neck is poking out of Lex's left breast pocket. And this little guy says,
What do you mean? Illogical.
And then we see in panel 4 that it is none other than Mr. Mind. Lex holds his hand up to get a closer look. I'm miming that for the benefit of our YouTube viewers. And Mr. Mind says,
Everything seems perfectly normal to me, Lex Luthor.
first a tiger, now a talking worm who knows my name?
Of course. I read about you in a comic book.
The next panel, Mr. Mind is taking a look at the magic accumulator, and he says,
Interesting device you have there. Offhand, I'd say it's intended to collect magic. And with me, it has to be offhand.
Mr. Mind laughs in the next panel and says,
Get it? Offhand? I don't have hands. Little joke there.
And off panel, Lex dryly says, very little.
Lex, together you and I can rule the world.
Why not? A certain hero always stopped me from ruling my world. I guess I'll settle for a dream world, or whatever this place is. And in the first panel of page 6, Mr. Mind is still in Lex's palm, but he's thinking,
I need someone to do my dirty work. When I rule, he can be my #1 slave.
And Lex is thinking, who knows? This worm might show me how to conquer my super foe. I can always step on the runt when I'm through with him. Mr. Mind is now whispering in Lex's ear through his speaker, and he says,
First, we'll have to use your device to snare a bolt of Shazam lightning. And for that, I have a scheme. Listen.
a slow dissolve.
A day later, as Billy Batson concludes his evening newscast.
Yeah, we see Billy behind the desk where he's reporting the news. He's waving to his audience and he's saying,
And so, folks, good night from all of us at Station Whiz.
as he finishes, a colleague of his in a blue suit and a checked shirt and a pinkish purplish bow tie, thick Boris Johnson style blonde hair, comes rushing in. Bow tie's obviously very popular on this earth this summer. He rushes in saying, Billy! Billy!
Holy moly, you look as though you've seen a ghost.
Worse, I've seen a worm. Mr. Mind is in our reception room this very moment, says Billy's colleague, pointing in the direction of the reception room, and I'm also pointing right now for the benefit of YouTube viewers. A slow dissolve.
And
Billy has entered the reception room, and what looks like Mr. Mind is bouncing on a tabletop in front of him, saying,
Marvel is rotten and ruinous and rancid and wretched.
Billy takes this all in, thinks to himself,
It must be a trap. Well, Billy Batson isn't going to fall into it.
and he cries,
Shazam!
as before, the lightning strikes. That is, almost as before.
yes, we see the massive boom and the giant cartoon lightning bolt striking, but there's also a little
Squip.
sound effect, and it looks as though a piece of the lightning bolt has sort of been sliced off. Very interesting. That rounds out page 6. In the first panel of page 7, Mr. Mind is still ranting away, saying,
Reeking and revolting and...
Cap interrupts him by flipping him away with a finger, saying,
The insult derby is over.
and then in panel 2 we see that this wasn't actually Mr. Mind. He's burst open, we see lots of springs and wires and stuff, and Cap scratches his head, saying,
What? That's no worm. It's a robot. And there's a note inside.
yes, we see a rolled up piece of paper which Cap unrolls, holds up, we see it under his thumb in the next panel, and it reads,
Meet me at the aquarium at midnight, if you dare, you big red buffoon. Hatefully yours, Mr. Mind.
That panel is definitely going in the socials, isn't it, listeners? That's fantastic. Cap reads this and says,
The nerve! He's challenging me. I'll accept and fix that wriggly wretch for good.
but what Cap doesn't see, standing round the corner of the room that he's in, holding up his magic accumulator, is none other than Lex Luthor. Mr. Mind, poking out of Lex's pocket, says,
Do you think our trick worked, Luthor?
Yes, I can feel the accumulator throbbing with the energy of the thunderbolt. In the final panel of page 7, we see that Mr. Mind is now astride the magic accumulator, and he says,
Excellent. We've got part of the magic that transforms Billy to that red bully and vice versa. We now have what we need to destroy evil's greatest foe.
Gosh, a slow dissolve, listeners. We're now at the top of page 8.
Midnight at the local aquarium. A scene of merriment during the day. Tonight, full of dark doings, for inside...
Yes, and take a drink, listeners, because there is a full moon over the aquarium. Full moon over the aquarium could be a Bruce Springsteen album or something, couldn't it? Let's be honest. I'm going to start writing these down.
Yes.
And either photoshopping them up or asking someone I know to draw them for me or something. But anyway, inside, you see a large tank, not so much the swimming pool, but a large tank. On one side of it, leaning down looking into the water, is Lex Luthor. Some kind of cylinder, maybe of oxygen or air or whatever, under his right arm. We can see the magic accumulator on the surface beside him. And on the other side of the tank is Mr. Mind, and he has a little canister and what looks like a diving mask attached to it beside him. Mr. Mind is saying,
The problem has always been to put that brat Billy Batson in the spot where he couldn't say Shazam.
But Billy isn't coming, says Lex. Captain Marvel is.
Trust me, Luthor, and do as I've told you.
And at this point off panel, we hear Captain Marvel's voice saying,
Mr. Mind, are you here or did a fish get you?
And in panel 4 we see that Mr. Mind is very quickly, I'm not sure how he managed it given that he doesn't have any fingers or thumbs, managed to put on his diving equipment, which is belted round his middle, and he's got the mask on and the canister on his back, and he leaps into the water tank saying,
It's his voice. Quick, Luthor, into the water.
And we see in the next panel that Lex has also put on all of his mask and diving gear, and he's also in the water, not wearing a diving suit or anything, just still wearing his grey prison fatigues, as you do. And we can see that the tank they're in is labelled Hammerhead Shark. Interesting. Given all the stuff that's been happening in the Spectre stories we've done recently, I sense a little bit of foreshadowing here. Cap has arrived on the scene and he can see Lex and Mr. Mind inside the tank, and he says,
I see you brought a friend, Mr. Mind. No matter, I'll handle him too.
And with that, Cap leaps up, flies up, and makes as though he's about to dive into the pool, saying,
I could smash through the glass, but I don't destroy property unnecessarily.
And the captioning over the first 3 panels of page 9 reads,
As Cap dives towards his foes, Lex Luthor discharges a magic bolt at him, causing an unexpected and dangerous transformation.
Yes, with a splash, Cap dives into the water, but then we see in panel 2, as they're all under the surface, Lex, as the caption says, activates the magic accumulator, which fires out a bolt of the magic lightning, which obviously strikes Cap, and he returns to being Billy Batson. In panel 4, Lex stretches out and punches Billy in the chops. Still underwater, that's horrible. He's punching a kid. That just shows you what an evil so-and-so Lex Luthor actually is. And while this is going on, Mr. Mind has climbed out of the water, got rid of his diving gear, perched on the side of the container, and he says,
Hit the brat, Luthor. Daze him while we finish sealing his doom.
And in panel 5, page 9, Lex has now climbed out of the tank, and they've sealed up the top. They've pulled a cover over, trapping Billy inside. Lex, we can see the water pulling underneath him as he drips dry, still holding his magic accumulator. We can see Billy in the tank looking a bit dazed. Still, he doesn't seem to have started drowning yet, which is good. Mr. Mind is saying,
That's it, Luthor. Lock the top in place before he can surface.
And we're back with Billy for the final panel of page 9. Underwater, he's aware of his predicament, and he's thinking,
Too thick. I can't break out. Can't say Shazam either. Holy moly, I'm in the worst trouble of my life.
Yes, you can see Billy's pounding on the side of the glass, trying to feebly break free. And in the first panel of page 10, see Billy still inside the container, Lex in the background, lifting what looks like a kind of rolling shutter, and Mr. Mind is saying,
Think you're in the worst trouble of your life? Not quite the worst. Notice, Luthor is lifting a grate. And behold, you've got company! The hammerhead shark who lives in the tank!
Yes, we see the hammerhead shark swimming in, and in panel 3 we see Billy. I'm amazed at Billy's vital capacity, listeners, that he's been able to hold his breath this whole time. Billy, down in the bottom of this water tank, with a hammerhead shark looming over him. Mr. Mind, balanced on the top of Lex Luthor's head, says,
Now you're in the worst trouble of your life. Shall we take our leave, Lexi?
You're my kind of man, worm, Mr. Mind, says Lex, and he looks like he's starting to move off, still holding up his magic accumulator. In the next panel, we're back with Billy underwater with a hammerhead shark staring him in the face as Billy thinks,
I'm about to become that ugly beast's midnight snack, and I'm helpless. And when I go, so does Cap. I can't let that happen. I don't matter, but the world needs Captain Marvel.
At this, Billy, still managing to hold his breath, starts to take off his jumper, and he continues to think,
I just remembered. Hammerhead sharks have been called the bulls of the sea, by Mr. Tawney, I believe.
And in the first panel of page 11, Billy has taken his jumper off completely and started waving it around in front of the shark.
I hope he wasn't joking, because if he wasn't, maybe my sweater will attract the shark. Come on, Sharky, charge!
And the caption for panel 2 reads,
He does, and...
Yes, we see Billy trying to get out of the way as the shark speeds towards him. Billy thinking,
His momentum is carrying him into the glass wall.
The shark's momentum indeed is strong enough to shatter the side of the glass case and send the shark hurtling forward, taking Billy's jumper with it, as Billy thinks,
His power did what I couldn't.
oh my gosh. Now, I have a lot to say about this part, but we'll come back to that in a short while. The caption for panel 4 of page 11.
Carefully, Billy gulps the sweet air into his starving lungs and shouts,
Shazam!
And there is a massive boom in the next panel. Once again, a cartoon Shazam lightning bolt strikes down, and the caption for the next panel reads,
within an eye blink.
Yep, take a drink, listeners, because with a full moon looming in the background, Captain Marvel speeds through the air and catches up with Lex Luthor and Mr. Mind. Lex Luthor says, he's escaped. He'll capture us.
Curses!
And in the first panel of page 12, Lex, just like showing his true colours, grabs Mr. Mind from his head and hurls him towards Captain Marvel, saying, Catch, Captain Marvel! Mr. Mind doesn't like this. He cries,
Traitor! Ingrate! Think!
To which Lex says, Sorry, Mr. Mind, but giving you to him gives me time to shoot a ball to myself and hope it returns me home. I don't like this world. And we see indeed in panel 2 of page 12, Lex activating his magic accumulator. It fires a burst of golden energy at him, and in panel 3 we see him twisting through a green and yellow and pink vortex with the word dream floating around him many times. Dream. And in panel 4, suddenly Lex is back in his little laboratory, and indeed he confirms, saying, I'm back. I wonder, was I dreaming? Or are those comic book characters real? Do they exist in another dimension? Who cares? I still have my accumulator. He holds the device up. I exhausted the magic, but I can get more. Then I'll destroy that blasted Man of Steel. For the moment, all that matters is I'm free, safe, and back where things are normal. And then, in the final panel of page 12, we see an arm, wearing blue, and a red cape, and a firm hand clamping Lex's shoulder, and someone clears his throat, saying, and Lex whirls around and looks pained and says, Oh, too normal. And a caption tells us we have reached the end indeed. Well, that was a lot of fun.
Wonderful.
Lex meeting Captain Marvel and Mr. Mine and stuff, but Superman still not meeting Captain Marvel.
No.
Interesting
That there's a Shazam story where Superman turns up and you only see a bit of his costume at the very, very end. Sound familiar to someone who's seen the movie how many times?
I think I saw it, was it 12 or 13 times in the cinema, the first one? Only made it to 7 for the second one because it wasn't on for as long and it wasn't as received as well, and I became disenchanted. But there you go. Giovanna and Asher and loads of other people still liked a lot of Instagram posts, so it doesn't matter. I'm concerned about the shark, quite frankly, Peter. I hope Captain Marvel took time to patch up the glass container, and, hopefully that didn't mean that every single part of the aquarium sort of flooded out through this broken case. So hopefully he put the shark into another case at least, or another tank, and saved it so that it wasn't just flipping around and dying on the surface.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure the Wisdom of Solomon made sure that he did that, yes.
That's put me at ease.
I'm concerned about the structural integrity of the aquarium. If a little bash from a hammerhead shark can destroy the tank that's actually designed for him.
Exactly. That is worrying. The other thing that I want to mention was, at no point is Superman's name actually said completely.
Very true.
There is a poster of him. He's obviously there. Lex does start to say super at one point, as if you can say his own name.
He says Man of Steel.
Yeah. This has me wondering if there's some sort of legal thing at the moment that presents them being mentioned in the same story together.
Could be.
Because, obviously we had the Captain Thunder story a few weeks ago when we did Superman 276. And that was obviously Superman meeting a character that looked very much like Captain Marvel, but wasn't actually Captain Marvel.
Yes.
And here we have Superman's greatest foe, meeting Captain Marvel and one of his pals and one of his greatest foes, but not actually mentioning Superman by name.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it might be an editorial difference, but both of those stories were edited by Julie Schwartz.
Ah.
So it's not as if Julie had an argument with himself and said, you're not using my character.
Of course.
Because obviously he could.
Yeah.
That's an interesting choice.
It could all just be a bit of fun and a bit of tease,
Yeah.
Lex obviously is under the impression that it was all a dream.
But as we know, comics do show parallel universes. That's been firmly established in lots of different stories.
Yes.
And I find it fascinating that Lex using this magical ability blasts a comic portraying this Earth. This as yet unnamed Earth, we'll get to that later on.
Uh-huh.
He blasts that and it draws him into it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Actually, it reminds me a bit of, there's an Abracadabra story just before this, I think, in Flash,
Right.
where Abra draws Barry and a little boy into an actual cartoon world.
Oh, yeah, I know the one you mean. Yes, I know the one you mean.
Yeah, I think we referenced that fairly recently, actually, as well. But yeah, so it did remind me of that a bit. As I said, we know that comics can represent other dimensions in these stories, so that is fantastic.
Yeah, because as we know, just obviously to remind everyone, Barry had read about Jay Garrick's adventures, etc., and of course we recently had Carrie Bates, his little expedition to Earth 1. It's interesting in the final page there where Lex sort of speculates, was I dreaming? Are they real? Do they exist in another dimension? So this is the first indicator, really, properly, that the Captain Marvel continuum, if you like, is a parallel reality to what the main Earth 1 reality is.
Very true.
Which is obviously the reason why we've done this story, listeners.
Lex actually hadn't been around for about a year prior to this story.
Right.
Which means he was maybe in jail or something during the whole Captain Thunder escapade. And I might have thought, oh, could that be Captain Thunder?
That's a point. That's a very good point, yeah. That's interesting. It's fun doing a Shazam story. We haven't done too many, but there's a few others. There's another one Pete suggested we do quite soon, which will be happening. And obviously there'll be a couple of issues in the 20s and 30s of the title that we'll get to eventually.
Yeah.
It's fun to do. It's very interesting just looking at what a good job Bob Osner does of doing the C.C. Beck, Kurt Schaffenberger style artwork, etc. It's gorgeous.
Oh, it's great fun. It's a totally different change of pace. It's just joyous. It's weird when you actually think about it and compare Shazam and Superman, and you think Superman's the almost gritty, realistic character in comparison.
Yes.
But the Captain Marvel Shazam stories are just joyous and fun and cartoony and ridiculous, but also they're also smart. They're not talking down. They are. Yeah. It's a celebration of the character and a celebration of the art form. They're always joyous fun. They're
also dark as heck because that's Mr. Mind and Lex basically leaving Billy to either drown or be eaten by a shark.
Yes.
That's, that's like, whoa, that escalated quickly.
If they had just left him to drown, it would have worked.
Exactly.
But no, they had to hammerhead shark him, didn't they? Didn't they? Yes.
Yep.
They'd seen Live and Let Die and thought, this is what we need to do.
Yeah, it's possible. I was very amused that Mr. Mind had a patented by sort of little notice stuck to the side of his giant
it's wonderful
robotic creature that was causing havoc.
Mr. Mind's very good at building things considering he has no limbs and is about, 2 inches long.
Yeah, that's so true.
I love Mr. Mind. He's so ridiculous.
And as we say, how did he manage to get the Aqualung on without any help? Unless Lex helped him off panel, of course. It's an interesting one. I think they could have done a little bit more with just sort of highlighting the difference between Lex's world and the sort of magical world that he's dropped into. But one thing I noticed while I was reading it, similar to the Carrie Bates Flash story we did a few weeks ago, Lex is still drawn like Lex. He still has a very realistic sort of look to him.
Yes.
Because if you compare him with, say, Billy's colleague in the blue suit, Billy's colleague in the blue suit and the man on the street, they're done very much in the Shazam family, story style.
Cartoonish look, yes.
Yeah. Lex is still drawn via open inverted commas realistically, in the same way that Carrie Bates, we sort of noticed, was drawn very realistically compared to the slightly looser way that Barry and Iris were drawn. So that's quite a good thing. And I suppose him talking to Talkie Tawny is quite a good way of sort of highlighting that things are immediately different, that this talking tiger in a suit is just, casually walking around. It works because the sort of Rex at this point is still such a clinical scientist.
Yes.
He's a good character to choose for this sort of story because he's the one that's going to be going, what?
Yeah, and as he said, this is really the first time he's trying out magic. So I don't think it's going to last very long. This is him, verging into Doctor Doom territory, being science and magic.
Yeah.
And this is the repercussions of it. He's thinking, probably not after this. No.
Yes. Maybe not after all. Yeah. Amused at Soups turning up in the last panel. I mean, I love the tease. Because we're still, nearly, at this point, roughly about 2 years away from Superman and Captain Marvel meeting for the first time.
Yes.
Officially. So it's good that this tease is going on. There's another issue of Shazam. Shazam's publishing history is very sporadic and it gets quite random almost at points, but I think issue 20 odd, maybe issue 30 odd, there's another issue of Shazam which has what looks like Cap and Superman fighting on the cover. We might do that one. I don't know if we've got that in the schedule and I'll have to decide that near the time.
Yeah.
But, there's a twist to that one. But, they obviously, as we, spoilers throwing ahead, they do meet in the 1976 JLA JSA Shazam Squadron of Justice crossover, so that's one to look forward to. No, it's a good one, this. I'm glad we got through a story with Mr. Mind.
Oh, without a doubt, he will return on the podcast as well.
And listeners, excellent job there by Peter by pre-recording Mr. Mind's dialogue so that it would sound authentic when played out of a little speaker during. I took my hat off to him 3 times there, listeners, at least.
Genuinely true. He put a hat on especially.
Peter, yes, round of applause to Peter for going the extra mile for that one, listeners. Well done, Petesy.
There you go. Apart from, of course, his thought bubble.
Yes.
Because obviously he wouldn't think that through a speaker.
Yes, of course not. That'd be weird. Ugh.
Yes. So it's not a no prize, folks. No.
Don't write in.
So we'll jump ahead now to Shazam Mail from issue 17 of Shazam. And of course, it is a 100-pager that the letters refer to, so there's a lot of chat about the other stories as well. So we'll just cover the parts relevant to this story.
Absolutely.
And the first letter says, Dear Editor, when I first heard that Lex Luthor was to fight Captain Marvel, I gritted my teeth and said, it can't be done! How wrong I was. Denny O'Neil handled the story, Captain Marvel meets Lex Luthor, Shazam 15, beautifully, as usual. I always enjoy Mr. Mind, but I wish he would get back to his old army outfits with the many medals. That's a worm with class. Of course, Lex and Mr. Mind should go well together, since they are both worms. Text Blaisdell's inking and Bob Oxner's pencils produced a unique look, which I rather like. And that comment's from David Finger from Willingham, Delaware.
Yep, editorial response concerns the rest of David's letter, which was basically concerning the Freddie Freeman Captain Marvel Jr. story, so we don't need that. The next letter goes like this. Dear Julie, as Earths 2, 3 and X are equivalent to Earth 1, there is another side to the logical universal coin, the illogical universe. Let us examine the characteristics of both worlds. The logical Earth 1. Science is in the majority, magic in the minority. Most of the superheroes in this world were created by logical events or scientific phenomena. That is the home of the Justice League and other logical superheroes. On this Earth, there exists a best-selling comic about an Alice in Wonderland type of universe. Its name is Shazam. The illogical Earth 1. Geographically and historically, it is the same as the logical Earth 1, but here, magic and science are almost equal, with a little more emphasis on magic. The ridiculous and insane are everyday life. It is a fantasy world, the world of Captain Marvel and the other Fawcett heroes. On this world, there is a best-selling magazine about a totally logical universe that could not exist. Its name is Superman. What one would deem logical on one of these Earths would be illogical on the other. Each has had thoughts of the other and has written stories about it in comic form, yet neither dreamed the other could even exist, until Shazam 15. Lex Luthor created the magic accumulator, a machine of science, open brackets, logic, close brackets, to extract magic, open brackets, illogic, close brackets, from the very air itself, its intention being to wipe out Superman. It was also a transporter that could zip him to the illogical universe, a logical and illogical bridge. Listeners, I hope you're keeping up with this. But only if Lex blasted a product of that illogic with the magic in the accumulator. That's when he spotted that Shazam comic. Unwittingly, he blasted the comic, the rest you know. Luthor found himself out of place. To Billy Batson, a logical being in his world, Luthor was a comic character come to life, if Billy knew who he was at all. At the end of the story, Luthor, with the magic of the illogical Earth and the accumulator, pointed the device at himself and was returned to his own world. He was his own means to return to his Earth. Denny O'Neil has discovered the key to the gateway on either side of which the worlds of Superman and Captain Marvel coexist. I hope you will use it wisely and not let the accumulator be destroyed, because you have found the perfect way for any of the DC heroes to team up with the Shazam family. I hope I've tied up some loose ends that Denny accidentally left untied, and after seeing a short preview of the Shazam TV show, I wish you all the luck in the world developing it. And that's from Mark Dooley, Columbus, Indiana, I'm guessing.
Indiana, I think, yes.
Brandon will probably shout at me for that.
And that's from Mr. Spock.
Yes.
With all that logic and illogic.
Editorial response to that one then.
Thanks. And what a letter you wrote. 1 point though. It would be too confusing to have two Earth 1s, so maybe we should call the Shazam planet Earth S.
Oh.
Okay, says E. Nelson Whitwell. So there you go. It has now got an official designation of Earth S.
Wow. That's tremendous.
And actually that letter has reminded me of something else. In the Captain Thunder story, if there is a Shazam comic on Earth 1, then would someone not have said, hey, is that Captain Marvel? As Captain Thunder comes in.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Maybe no one in Metropolis reads that comic.
Gasp. It's got really poor distribution in Metropolis. Lex Luthor gets all the copies.
It's a good point, though, because Lex obviously has that issue of Shazam. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. There is a letter on this letter's page. It's not relevant to the story, sadly, but it's worth mentioning. A letter from someone called Billy Batson from Methuen in Massachusetts. So that's pretty cool.
Gasp.
Peter's going to read the next relevant letter.
Dear Julie, that Denny O'Neil. Way back about 5 or 6 years ago, he wrote a handful of the best and funniest camp humour stories ever published in a comic mag. And after the camp hero died, he wrote and writes the best straight adventure stories possible. But somewhere, deep in the dark mind of Denny, in between the mysterious shadow adventures and the complicated JLA stories, lies a little voice of camp that just wants to burst out. And Captain Marvel meets Lex Luthor. Let that voice be heard. It was the funniest DC story I ever read. And Bob Oxner, oh, what I wouldn't go to have the original of Panel 1, page 4. It was superb. So, until the big red cheese smells like Limburger, make mine Marvel, open bracket, Captain, that is. And that's from Chris Padovano from Sayreville, New Jersey.
Editorial response simply reads, yes, we think Denny's a good scout. He certainly knows how to pitch camp. Very good. And from ENB, the next letter. Dear editor, every issue of Shazam has been great. The new story in number 15 was good. But please don't use Superman again. You made clear the difference between Superman's world and Captain Marvel's. But Luthor and Mr. Mind? Our comic art club at school all agrees that Captain Marvel is better than the Man of Steel. We notice that a majority of your letter contributors are of the older set. Don't forget us. Also, any comic book that can hold the attention of my 7-year-old brother is destined to be a bestseller. Shazam is. And that comes to us via Francis Sahai, Scotch Plains, New Jersey.
And editorial response is, we haven't forgotten you, and your letter is the proof.
That's interesting.
The next letter says, Dear Nelson, well, you warned me what to expect when I was at DC last week. Oh yeah, lucky you. But I must say that Captain Marvel meets Lex Luthor turned out even better than you described it. It's incredible how Denny O'Neil continues to think of new and imaginative plots, though admittedly the death trap was much like the one the Joker used in the Batman last year. The escape was totally different. And it's about time your villains started forcing the change themselves, rather than relying on Captain Marvel's inexplicable predilection for changing to Billy unnecessarily. Luthor himself came through very well, considering that Denny had never touched him before.
Interesting.
Any errors in personality were less noticeable here than in a Superman story, so it turned out rather well for all concerned. And that's from Rich Morrissey from Framingham, Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, we've had many letters from Rich in the past. That's good. Good. Nice that you got to visit DC offices. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. That's good to know. That's a nice bit of context for the whole thing. That's cool. The editorial response to that one just concerns Rich's comments on one of the stories that we didn't read, so we won't bother with that. But the next letter goes like this. Dear ENB, Denny O'Neil is by far the best scripter Shazam has, a fact made amusing because O'Neil made a name for himself by writing socially relevant three-dimensional shockers that revolutionised, if only for a short time, the entire comics world. However, a good writer is a versatile writer, and it seems to me that Denny is the only one you have who really understands the Marvel family's formula for success, superheroics with a twist. He knows what's right for every situation. Captain Marvel meets Lex Luthor was the kind of novelty fare that should be regularly offered in this magazine. The mag has no discernible boundaries, so why not do everything with it? The story was well written and very interesting, though if Luthor had half the brains he's supposed to have, he would have stopped in a drugstore and bought a copy of Superman, thereby finding out his foe's much-guarded secret identity. The letter is from Bob Rhodey, Oak Brook, Illinois, and the editorial response is...
It happens Luthor did get a Superman comic, but he saw Clark Kent changing into Superman and decided the comics in that world were as ridiculous as everything else. Says E. Nelson Bridwell. That's a very good point, actually. He could have got a Superman comic and found out so much. Yeah, very good, Bob. Yes, I'm impressed.
Gosh, it seemed like the letters took us longer to get through than the story. That was very interesting. I would have, I enjoyed it. There were some really good points in the correspondence there. I like the fact that, the kids sort of saying that they prefer Captain Marvel to Superman.
Yes.
I think on a level I did when I was a little boy.
Yeah, it's great for younger readers. So yeah, fantastic character.
Definitely. And it's a very interesting story. That last letter making a point that a couple of years ago Denny O'Neil was writing Hard Travelling Heroes, and now he's
writing Mr. Mind.
Yeah, it's all very interesting.
Shark Tank Doom Traps.
Yeah, I want some more. I want Lex to go back. I want to kind of
Yes.
But
yes.
but it's interesting that he did think it was all a dream. So we'll have to see what happens if there are any other stories before we get to the end of our epic podcast quest to see if Lex encounters Mr. Mind or the Marvel family in any capacity ever again, or indeed has any other interactions with any versions of himself from parallel universes. So we'll have to see how that all plays out, won't we?
Yes, and if you want to see how that plays out, you should subscribe to us and make sure you don't miss a single episode. You can also email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com and make sure you follow us on social media because we post up lots of bonus material for this and indeed every episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth 2 Podcast, and on Twitter, because we're sticking with that, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it's the number 2 for all of our social media.
It certainly is. Be sure to check out the socials this week, listeners, because I've got a whole bunch of foreign reprints of this story. You know how I love my foreign reprints. This one travelled far and wide. If you're feeling generous, you go to wherever it is you receive your podcasts and give us a nice review. That would be fab. Or you go to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of beverage. That would also be fab. But yeah, just check out the socials. Just let us know what you're thinking. That would be fab. That would be great. I keep saying fab. Why? IDK. Anyway, we'll be back next week with something else, won't we, Peter?
We most certainly shall, yes. So on that note, I've been Peter.
I've been David. Take care. We'll see you soon on
The Earth 2 Podcast.
Traitor! Ingrate! Fiend!
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
You help me defeat my archenemy, Luthor, then I'll help you defeat your super foe.
To which Luthor says...
You're my kind of worm. Sorry, got that completely wrong. That's a good start.
I've recorded all the dialogue, by the way.
Amazing. I cannot tell you how excited and pleased I am. I want to jump up and down. We'll be here all night.